Alright, hi, I'm Chris Marsh, and I did my project on John Osborne and his play Look Back in Anger. John Osborne was a British author who wrote in the time post World War II. He was in a group of authors who were known as the Angry Young Men, and the men in this group all wrote in a time, all became adults in a time post World War II, and this really shaped their views and thoughts and the way that things that they wrote about. Um, they often felt displaced by society, and just like they didn't fit in the world that they were left with after World War II. Um, they were all came up in a time where education had become either free or cheaper, so all these writers were educated, and they felt too educated for where they were. They were all usually middle to lower class, but felt that they were educated enough to move up in the world, but they were being held back by society at the time, and they couldn't move up in the class structure in which they lived in, and so often they wrote about things that criticized the class structure and the society that they were in, and how they felt displaced and just really held back. And one of the things that they would write about was trying to describe the human condition, and one thing that they felt was that you couldn't truly understand the human condition, or the average human condition at least, without having felt suffering at some point, and how they all felt that they had suffered because they were all lower class but educated and felt really held back. And they would criticize things that would hold them back and keep them from growth and learning the true them. They were all really about figuring out who they were and figuring all that out, and anything that would stop them they would usually write about or criticize in some sort of way. And so the play that I looked at by Osborne was Look Back in Anger, which was about a young man named Jimmy, and Jimmy is an angry young man, which that's another thing to come out of this group of writers, is the archetype or stereotypical angry young man character, and which is usually an educated middle class man who doesn't feel they fit in and is angry and lashes out about things. So Jimmy is married to a woman named Allison, who was an upper class woman, and Jimmy thinks lacks drive. She really criticizes and scrutinizes her for being upper class, and him thinking that she just doesn't have any ambition whatsoever because she's already fine, and he has all this ambition to move up and to break status quo and whatnot. He wants to do things and she doesn't. So he criticizes her, and at one point in the beginning of the play they get in an argument, and he tells her he wishes she'd get pregnant and lose the child so that way she could see what suffering was like. So there's that, and then Allison has a friend who comes and visits, and during that we find out that Allison is pregnant, and Jimmy doesn't know this, and so she talks with her friend, and her friend thinks she should tell Jimmy, and but thinks she or should leave Jimmy and go stay with her father. And so she, after a while, she convinces her, and Jimmy's wife Allison leaves her, and Jimmy's angry about this, and then we see that after that Jimmy and Allison's friend start hooking up and become a thing for a while, and Jimmy and Allison had at one point lived in an apartment with Jimmy's good friend who he kind of had a business going with, and then Allison moves out, new friend moves in with Jimmy, and they're a thing for a while. His friend doesn't really say anything, because the friend was also a mutual friend of Allison's, but it's kind of odd. So then we see progression through the play, and eventually Allison's friend is no, I can't be with Jimmy, he's an awful guy, all this, and then so they break things off, and it ends with Jimmy and Allison kind of reconnecting and trying to make amends. He finds out about the pregnancy and all that, and it kind of ends there. And so that's kind of where I was at with Look Back in Anger.